The gross domestic product of Nigeria grew by 3.19% in the second quarter of 2024, driven by growth in the services sector. According to the GDP report released by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) on Monday, the growth rate is higher than the 2.51% recorded in the second quarter of 2023 and higher than 2.98% in the first quarter of 2024. But of course, when you put the fourth quarter of 2023, you see that it's lower. But then the report indicated that Q2 GDP performance was driven by the services sector, which grew by 3.79% and contributed about 58.76% to the total GDP. To better understand this, I am joined by Segun Sopitan, Principal Partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting. Thank you for joining me today, sir.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Absolutely, Mr. Sopitan. Thank you for coming. Now, I'd like to get your reaction to the just released Q2 2024, GDP rate. What do you make of it? What do you think also contributed to this expansion?
I think for me, it's considering, it's important to contextualize things and considering where we are as a country and what's happening in Nigeria today, what's happened in the last year and a half. 3.19% GDP growth rate, you could argue that it's a good thing. It's an increase over last quarter's performance. It's an increase as well over last year Q2, and therefore you would argue, and the politicians will say, "Oh, this is good," and they will point to this as evidence that they're doing well. But for me, given the context and the current realities of the country, it's nowhere near good enough. We need to be more demanding, and our expectations must be higher. And when I say our expectations, I'm talking about the government and the people that are running the economy. The president has said that his objective is to drive us to double-digit GDP growth rates over time. I would imagine that he would want to achieve that before the end of his first term. And if you therefore juxtapose this against that expectation, you see that we're far way off. And clearly, what that means is that a lot more needs to be done. Of course, you can disaggregate the number and try to determine where the growth is happening, what's happening in the different sectors, and maybe that could be a pointer to what we need to do, where we need to focus more energy and attention on. But just looking at it from the larger picture, I would say it's not good enough. It's good in the sense that we're making progress, but progress has got to be faster given the challenges that we face as a people.
Right. You talked about the double, GDP figures we're looking at. How realistic is that really, and how long will it take us to have that? What are the things we need to see in place before we can actually achieve that growth?
Look, it's not as hard as some would think or some would have us believe. If you look around us, just do a comparative analysis. First of all, Africa as a continent is is the second fastest growing continent, region in the world, second only to Asia. And Asia has consistently, over the last 30 years, posted the highest growth rates, around the world. So what are they doing? What are they getting right? And then if you bring that back home, Africa as a continent is growing. We are regarded as an emerging region where there's a lot of growth, a lot of potential and opportunity for growth across the different sectors. And some of our neighboring countries are doing much better than we're doing. Côte d'Ivoire, for example, recorded 6% GDP growth rate, Angola, Libya, even Libya that is war-torn,
If I may come in here, what are the things we probably need to do differently? Maybe take a leaf from these countries that you have talked about, things we need to do.
Well, I think that we need to focus on the things that will drive growth. So one of the things that we have gotten terribly wrong is our power sector and, the question of electricity and energy. You cannot have growth and development without, very strong numbers in the electricity sector. We're still talking 5,000 megawatts as a country of 220 million people with a GDP of something around $300 billion. It's simply not good enough. We're never going to grow at the type of rates that the president talks about if we don't fix electricity, if we don't fix some of the basic infrastructure that drive economic activity, transportation, in particular road transportation, rail has got to be addressed because you need that to move goods and services efficiently across the country. There needs to be more concerted energy and effort in deliberately driving improvements in those things that will result in the kind of growth that we expect to see. So we have this marginal increases, here and there. Somebody is celebrating the fact that we have 5,100 megawatts of electricity as a country and saying, oh, this is a sign of progress. But hello, we have hovered around 5,000 for 25 years. It's atrocious. So if we really want to see growth, these things must be addressed, must be dealt with in a very clear, articulate, well-programmed manner, sequenced programmed manner that will ensure that within a very short space of time, we see development. It's not difficult, for example, to move us to 20,000 megawatts. You can achieve that in 3 years. There are so many different types of, when you talk about the energy mix, for example, there are opportunities to leapfrog. You don't need to talk about putting electricity on the national grid. We know how atrocious the situation with the national grid is. So what happened to renewable energy? What happened to solar, wind, and all of that? So we've got to be more aggressive with attending to the problems we have that are curtailing our potential to grow as much as we can grow.
I like how you sort of focused on the power sector. I was going to ask you more, but I think you've said a lot, so let's just move on to other things. Now, just like you said, we saw President Tinubu reacting to the figures, saying that the economy is on the right trajectory. But then the everyday Nigerian wants to know, what does growth translate to? When you said the GDP had grown by 3.19%, and for them, they want to also know why they cannot point to any visible growth actually in the past quarter that, this particular data points to. More like, people just want to understand, okay, when they say GDP has grown, so what exactly are they talking about? What's this about?
Look, and I think that's the problem. You see, it's one thing to grow your GDP as a number, as economic data, economic statistic, and celebrate that. But there's, you've got to have inclusive growth. You've got to have growth that the man on the street can feel. At the end of the day, the economy, governance, and all of that is about the people. If the people are not feeling it on the street, then you really aren't doing much, especially in a country where you have the kind of poverty that we have. It shouldn't be too difficult to have the kind of growth that the man on the street will feel. So 3.19%, the man on the street is thinking, oh yeah, really, we've grown. How come I'm not seeing this in my personal finances? How come I'm not seeing this happen, reflect in my business? Yeah, so we have to have inclusive growth that the man on the street can touch. And the reason we're not having that is that the multiplier effect of this growth is not happening. The growth should percolate from government spending down to economic activity, an increased rate of economic activity right in the informal economy. There is a disconnect between those two things. So what you've seen, and what's probably driving part of this growth we're seeing, is that government revenues has increased as a result of subsidy removal and as a result of the floating of the exchange rates. Government revenues has increased significantly. So that is supposed to percolate down because government drives spending. It's the largest single spender in the economy, but that's not happening apparently. We're not seeing that increased revenue translate to increased economic activity and economic progress and prosperity for the people on the streets. And that's why we will not see the kind of growth also that we expect to see, apart from the other things that I've said earlier.
All right, well, talking about this GDP growth, how can this be effectively sort of translated into what the ordinary man can actually feel? How can they begin to feel it? I want us to sort of give us something practical to translate this into improved living conditions and household income for the citizens. What are the transmission mechanisms we need to sort of bridge the gap between macroeconomic performance and microeconomic realities? The transmission mechanism basically now.
Look, I remember, I think it was Governor Donald Duke in Cross River State, back in the day, about 2007, when he was running the TINAPA project. And there was something that I thought was profound that he said, one of the objectives of that project, the TINAPA project, which by the way is moribund now, sadly, one of the objectives for him at that time was to drive prosperity of his people. And he did say that, he could easily have approached the development of that project by industrializing it, by bringing in heavy machinery and heavy equipment, and do everything in as tech-driven a manner as possible. But he chose not to. He chose to go the direct labor route. Why? So that there can be a connect, this connect that you talk about. So as government is spending, there has to be a deliberate effort to make sure that the spending is done in a manner that affects the people as much as possible. So who are the people that are getting the contracts from government? Who are their subcontractors? Who are the people that are supplying those people? Because, if you look at it that way, then you can see the indirect impact that government activities and, government infrastructure spending and all of that can have on the people. It looks as if we're not seeing enough of this, and in general, we're not seeing enough spending anyway. We know that there's a revenue increase. Where is the expenditure increase? Where are the projects? It's been a year. Where are the projects that are accounting for this additional increase, both at the federal government level and at the subnational, especially, in fact, at the subnational level? So there's a disconnect between government activity and economic activity at the middle, the retail level, the consumer level, and at the bottom of the pyramid, in the informal sector. So that disconnect needs to be bridged, by deliberate government policy and deliberate government action with regards to how they're managing their expenditure and their projects and their programs.
Well, let's further break this GDP figure down, focusing on the non-oil sector now. The telecom industry was the third largest contributor to the real GDP in the quarter under review. Now, it came behind crop production and trade industries, which contributed 20.35 and 16.39 respectively. What do you make of this composition, really?
It's not surprising. ICT, as we know, we're now in the age of the AI, robotics, automation, and all of that. So that sector is going to see a lot of growth. Agriculture, it's all about food. We human beings need to eat, otherwise you're dead. So and of course, as we know, Nigeria is blessed with a lot of arable land. In fact, we're doing nowhere near enough of what we need to be doing in the agricultural sector. So even though it's reporting strong growth numbers in these Q2 figures, we can and we should be doing much better than that. Industrial sector, trade services are also growing, and these are all very good. So these are pointers to the areas that perhaps if you're an investor or you're a Nigerian business person looking for where the opportunities are, your pointers are right there. ICT, telecoms in particular, has grown significantly, in Q2, and then of course agriculture, trade services, and all the other sectors. So these are just the growth areas. These are things that are driving growth in the economy, and that are pointers as to where investment needs to be pushed into, and government needs to focus energy and effort into to drive, more growth in those areas.
I like what you said about ICT. Now, if we further break ICT down, we find out that the telecoms subsector is actually contributing to a large extent to that particular sector. Now, talk to us. What do you think can be done to sort of deepen growth in that particular subsector? Because just recently, we heard that one of the CEOs from one of the major telecommunication companies talking about how that they're in dire strait at this point in time.
That it's important, with all that has happened with inflation in the last year and a half, in fact, in the last 2 years, with devaluation of the naira, the exchange rate, with the removal of subsidies, one of the few things that has not gone up in terms of pricing is telecom services. So I think it's important that Nigerians take a small cue from what that gentleman that you quoted has said, and expect a tariff increase in that area as well very soon. Otherwise they probably, I wonder how they've managed to sustain the current level of prices given what has happened in the economy. So you'll probably see price increases in that sector so that they can probably remain healthy and continue to provide high quality services. Notice how the quality of service in the telecom sector has dropped significantly. Data quality is very low. Dropped calls and all of that is happening, more than one would care to see. So, and I think that may be because the investment in that sector is really, really not as high as what would have wanted to see it at. So expect some changes in that regard to see more growth, in the telecom sector in the coming months.
All right, so talk to us finally. What's your takeaway from these GDP results? We'll close on that in 30 seconds.
Achieve the objectives of the president, we need to see more action. We need to see more coordination. There's a lot of disconnect, lack of coordination between monetary policy authorities and between the fiscal authorities. We need to see a lot more coordination in that regard. We need to see more, from customs services, from, border control, immigration. All of these things tie into what happens within the GDP. And then we need to see more with regards to dealing with the insecurity in the country. Because, where you don't have peace, you can't have economic development and progress. So if we're going to achieve the double digits that the president has spoken about, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and that work must be done with purpose. Right now, I'm sorry to say I'm not seeing enough of that coordination and that purpose in government activities. So far, it's been, to a large extent, business as usual. We've got to change that if we're going to achieve the objectives that the president has laid out for himself.
Thank you so much, Segun Sopitan, Principal Partner, Woodridge and Scott Consulting. Thank you for your time on the show today.